Hi again. On page 202 of Armageddon, now in the chapter Jerusalem, What Now? More speculation, this time from the 1960s, late 60s and 70s, about the significance of Israel's return and nationhood. America's relations with Russia progressed from the crises of the early 60s, the U-2 spy plane incident of 1960, and the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962, through the Test Ban Treaty of 1963 to the spirit of détente of the early 1970s. There seems to be evidence of this détente in the premillenarian literature. Russia was not as frequent a topic as before. It had lost its newsworthiness. But the slant did not change. Russia had continued to be depicted as a demonic power that is about to pounce on the poor Jews in the Middle East, or is about to come to blows with the Antichrist, leading the European common market as the revived Roman Empire. Martin R. DeHaan, director of the radio Bible class, wrote in 1960 in The King's Business on Russian communism and God's timetable. He used the time-honored equation of Magog equals Russia, saying that this identification had been the consensus of Bible expositors since Russia's earliest times. He claimed that only a few years earlier the fulfillment of Ezekiel's prophecy had seemed remote, but we are today living in the very day of the fulfillment of these prophecies. For further emphasis, he proclaimed, quote, God has clearly foretold that Russia will meet her doom only in Palestine, when she meets up with the Western Alliance of Nations under the leadership of a Superman upon the mountains of Israel. We are, and dare to be, dogmatic about this fact, for we have the clear teaching of the Word of God on this matter. Russia's program of aggression, bit by bit, is running true to form according to prophecy. Oh, that men would turn to this book for their information and guidance in dealing with the present Russian crisis. End of quote. Unfortunately, DeHaan offered his reader no suggestion of what should be done, even though he was partly party to the revealed wisdom of the ages. He concluded by simply announcing, the stage is all set. Israel is in the land, Russia is on the march, the United Nations, described in Ezekiel 38, are seeking to organize, waiting only for one man, the Superman of the last days, to unite them against the King of the North. End of quote. DeHaan's dogmatism, however, was in disagreement with the speaker at the West Coast Prophetic Congress at Los Angeles in 1961, who taught that the Russians would not be destroyed by an opposing army, but by the direct supernatural intervention of God himself. Evangelist Billy Graham, in his 1965 book, dramatically entitled World Aflame, wisely avoided any specific identification of nations, but on the very first page observed the world around him and lamented, we seem to be plunging madly toward Armageddon. Such warnings of doom in this national bestseller by one so highly esteemed in America serve to reinforce the general acceptance of lesser men's systems of interpretation, which made more hazardous identifications. An interesting presentation on the identification of Russia with Ezekiel's ROSH was developed by Wilbur M. Smith. This was described in The Future of Russia, an article appearing in the October 1963 issue of Moody Monthly. Moody's vice president, S. Maxwell Coder, cited Smith's claim that the Byzantine Empire had been invaded by northern barbarians in the 9th century, and that Photius, the Patriarch of Constantinople, called these invaders by the biblical name ROSH. According to Smith's argument, the term spread into the Russian language. The thrust of the presentation was to prove that the subject of Ezekiel's prophecy was identical with the modern state of Russia. Photius identified the invaders from the north as the ROSH of Ezekiel's prophecy, and the name stuck. He was wrong, and so every argument based upon that identification since that time is also wrong. A similar question was also the concern of Richard DeHaan on the radio Bible class in a 1968 book, Israel and the Nations in Prophecy. DeHaan admitted that the identification of Russia, Moscow, and Tobolsk with terms in Ezekiel was not unanimously accepted by scholars, but he concluded that no supporting evidence was necessary for Russia's location in the north made such an identification positive. He also offered to a further refinement of the end-time chronology, arguing that the Battle of Armageddon would come at the end of a 7-year tribulation period, but that the invasion by Russia would occur at the middle of that tribulation. Hence he was able to claim, "We are not looking for the battle of Gog and Magog, but for the Son of God." Current events were nevertheless emphatic signs of the end. Radio preacher C.M. Ward was teaching in 1969 that Israel had the capacity to develop an atomic bomb and might have nuclear warheads by 1970. He felt this would cause Russia to rattle her atomic weapons in the Mediterranean, and the United States might reply in kind. Referring to the Russian threat to Israel, Ward said, "Hell is mobilizing its final efforts to pull down this flag of promise and hope to mankind and to raise its own banner of slavery." End of quote. Russia was testing God's promises to Abraham. "I will bless them that bless thee, and him that curseth thee will I curse." Genesis 12:3. In early 1971, Ward speculated that the strategic arms limitation talks, that is, the SALT talks, between Russia and the United States, might trigger a Soviet move into the Middle East, since she already occupied Egypt and could, if the talks were successful, depend on conventional weapons without fear of atomic retaliation by the United States. I'll put in a link to what Nelson Barber and C.T. Russell said way back in 1877 about the roles of Russia, Jerusalem, and 1914 in the last days. What has all this got to do with Armageddon? And I'll also put in a link to the playlist from which that video comes, which is JW Roots. See you next time.